idea that I will be giving in 1 week to my first year constitutional law class, i.e. an analogy between the notion of democracy in our systems and the bashing that John Cleese, one of my favorite heroes from Monty Python's, gave to the notion of American football. How is it possible, the American football as they call it there, to be used, this term, for a game where foot or feet is very rarely used, and in fact the ball is not actually a ball, it's something that looks like a melon. So by the same token, democracy here, i.e. the idea that Kratos power lies with the people, and essentially decision-making power lies with the people, is an idea that perhaps we could further debate. Our first, in this distinguished panel, our first speaker joining us from, is it Côte d'Azur? Or can you hear me? Professor Soskies. There is a problem with the connection. So the first in our panel will be David Soskies, Professor of Political Science at the London School of Economics, who joins us from France at the moment, hopefully without any technical issues.
David, can you hear us? Sorry. David, can you hear us now?
Yes. Yes.
Great, fantastic.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, fantastic, yes.
So, somewhat symbolic that I have on this. Can people hear what I'm saying now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Somewhat symbolic that I have on my Skype screen internet connection problems between France and Greece, and talk. Is that okay?
No, actually, we lose you at some point.
The talk is a pretty speculative talk about the future of the Eurozone and how Greece ties into that. But I first want to go through a range of what we might think of as underlying structural problems, not just of the Greek economy, but certainly of the Greek economy, and just how difficult it is to deal with those problems in a... Hello?
Yes, we hear you, great. Yeah, now we hear you very well.
In a Can you?
Yes.
I'm getting a lot of feedback. Just how difficult it is to deal with those problems in under the sort of constraints which the Greek government is acting at the moment. So I want to go through that to start with, and then look at this question of how Greece ties into the Eurozone. If one looks at a number of problems, the exchange rate, labour market, regulation, recapitalisation of banks, and the fiscal deficit, what I basically very much believe is that these problems are soluble, but they're only soluble within a context in which growth is a central, as it were, aid to the solution, which I think of as a French way of looking at things, as opposed to a German way of looking at things, which sees the solution to these structural problems as necessary for bringing about growth. Let me just go through them each very briefly. Starting off with the implicit exchange rate being too high. So Greece has obviously made significant process on an internal devaluation. Wage costs have been cut in Greece. There hasn't, however, been a very strong impact of the wage cuts on the implicit real effective exchange rate of the Greek economy, nor indeed has there been any noticeable impact on unemployment. And this illustrates how difficult it is to attack these problems in what one might describe as a direct way in a high unemployment environment. First of all, the wage costs have only been very partially passed on in the form of prices, in part because product markets are protected, in part because companies are in a really difficult position and deeply concerned to increase profits if they can do so. So you have a standard phenomenon of falling real wage cuts, with falling real wages, which then cut into domestic demand, and hence push up unemployment rather than push it down. And the conditions under which external growth comes about as a consequence of an internal devaluation depends critically on whether or not the wage cuts get passed on in the form of lower prices. And secondly, on how big the external sector is. If the domestic sector is a very large sector, real wage cuts have much more impact in an inflationary way on consumption and on domestic expenditure, then you get the benefit of increased demand from the external sector. You can see on the next chart that indeed it's true that Greece has a high degree of employment protection, a high index of employment protection legislation, as do Spain and Italy. But in a high unemployment world, that doesn't seem to help very much. You also see Ireland has got a very low score on the employment protection legislation index. But if you go on one chart more, look at the youth unemployment rate, you can see that Ireland is also doing very badly in terms of youth unemployment, roughly on a par with Portugal, or as badly as Spain and Greece. There's also an additional problem which arises, which is in this high unemployment world, when you deregulate labour markets, companies deeply needing to rebuild their profitability will use the opportunity of labour demand is growing before deregulated. Hello?
Yes, now we hear you, yes.
If I go on, if we go on one further to the chart, change in unemployment and change in demand from the crisis to 2011, you can see very clearly that the preconditions for increasing employment, reducing unemployment, is an increase in aggregate demand, which is on the horizontal axis. The percentage change in unemployment is on the vertical axis of this chart. And you can see how Greece, having had a big negative change in output, has had a big positive change in unemployment. The third problem, again, recapitalisation of banks. It's obviously especially true of countries like Greece, where loans are losing quality, bank loans are losing quality because firms are going bankrupt, unemployment is rising, people can't pay back their loans. But the big problem is, if you look at the next chart, you can see that Greece is in fact at the country in which the rejection rates for bank loans and overdrafts earlier this year, 2012, is significantly higher than all the other countries there, though Ireland and Spain also have pretty high rates. We might say, as Draghi has said, that one of the big problems about the ECB's operations at the moment is that the Eurozone monetary policy is refusing to operate in the appropriate way because the ECB can't translate ECB policy rates, obviously extremely low, into commercial bank lending rates. Outright monetary transactions can be partially answered to that, but it's very unclear how far they will go. And even if commercial banks can borrow at low rates, there's no guarantee that loans, that these low rates will be passed on into lending rates will take place. And this is the current problem which is facing the banking at the moment. It has very low rates, but banks can borrow at very low rates in the UK, but they're not passing those low rates on. Finally, the fiscal deficit, again, most obviously, as the UK experience shows, it's incredibly difficult to directly attack fiscal deficit when you're in a period of slow growth, because the attack on the fiscal deficit slows growth, raises unemployment, and then magnifies all the key problems. If you go back to the original chart, chart 3, you can see that the UK is a very good example. Greece is another one where attacking the fiscal deficit has led to slow growth, which has again reinforced these problems. So the conclusion from what I regard as a rather pragmatic political economy perspective is that attacking these problems head on, they're problems which need to be solved eventually, but attacking them head on is very unlikely to be successful. It's likely to actually aggravate unemployment, it's going to aggravate political problems. But one might say, what alternative if Germany runs the Eurozone? Well, obviously the alternative which has been discussed a great deal is simply that Greece should default and leave the euro. Now, this is actually a perfectly feasible thing to do, but it requires a great deal from a government, from a very activist government, if that was to work. A government under those circumstances needs to be prepared to take over the banking system for a period of time. It has to be prepared to print money, which isn't actually a problem if there's a very low inflation environment, but it has to be prepared to do that. It has to legislate the private defaults, revaluation of loans, etc. in drachmas. And the real problem is it's difficult to see a government which is capable of taking measures of that magnitude. In particular, given that the government is probably, was unlikely to be very well prepared for doing it. Of course, in my view, the Greek government probably should be well prepared to do this, because it's perfectly possible the Greek economy will be forced into Brexit. But it's uncharted water, and it seems a very risky way to go. Really, I want to surrender the brief heart of my talk, which will go on a very, very short time longer. Is Europe reconfiguring? As I see it, France is likely to become the dominant player in the Eurozone over the next 2 years or so. Why? First of all, the French supporters for getting into the common currency in the first place have really disappeared. First of all, the French wanted to benefit from low German inflation. Well, that's hardly a relevant issue in the world we live in. At the time, the French wanted to make sure that Germany would be tied into Western Europe after the fall of the war, not sort of move into becoming a Große Deutschland or anything like that. Pictures of Mitterrand holding hands with Kohl. But again, the notion of Germany moving into the centre of Europe is really largely now irrelevant. And France also believed that it was going to be able to have a real share in running the euro economy if it was a common currency. And again, that clearly just hasn't happened. So the French argument for staying in the eurozone or for staying tied into Germany is much less powerful than the German argument that the eurozone being very close to France. And that argument is all about the preventing French-Italian devaluation and enabling Germany to have built up the low implicit German real effective exchange rate in the very effective way in which it's done so as a result of the eurozone. So the French are going to be moving in, it seems to me, to a strong bargaining position in terms of the eurozone. And in particular, that's a bargaining position which it might occupy, particularly with Italy, to some extent with Spain. So far, it's been, so long as this crisis is basically temporary, don't rock the boat. But one of the developments which has really taken place, in my view, over the last year or so, has been a growing acceptance, not just among politicians, but also among central bankers and in many ministries of finance, that the crisis is not a temporary phenomenon and that the world is likely to have slow growth for several more years. And this is linked up with understanding how difficult it's going to be for either the United States or China to act as the world's locomotive. That, I think, is now putting France into a position where the French government, the new French government, has really got to confront its very fundamentally difficult situation which it's in. Unemployment in France is really rising sharply. French government position in general has been that growth is a precondition for reform. Growth, you need growth in order to get growth, and growth is crucially a precondition for employment creation. And politically, the French government is in a situation where employment creation is becoming of greater and greater importance. The recent Supra quote, which I've got down here, where almost out of control. And he asked the question, will it rise by very much? Yes, it will rise. At some point we will be able to reverse it. Yes, he says, but these are economic decisions, European decisions. We need growth to create jobs. So it's a very clear statement by the French government, it seems to me, that growth is what they need, and they can only get that if there's a change in the way the eurozone works. The final thing Bundesbank President voted against the outright monetary transactions, the OMT initiative. This is a really significant fact, suggesting that Draghi is really prepared to take the ECB in order to develop policies which it sees as necessary to cure the crisis. So I will stop at that point and just say Greece needs to be part of some common understanding of the Eurozone reconstructed on broad French lines of thought, in which France plays a much larger role, in particular in leading Southern Europe. Major reforms of the Greek economy are necessary, but they're conditional on growth. Maybe the Eurozone will split up in some sort of way north-south, or maybe economic governance will change in the Eurozone, with the ECB more independent of Germany and closer to France and Italy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Soski. Should we have a very quick round of, first round of questions, or to Professor Soskis, or should we move on? Yes, Gustavo Piga. Professor, can you, Professor Piga, Professor, no, can you, Professor, can you hear us? Yes, can you hear us? Professor, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, yes.
Professor Piga is, would like to ask you a question. And
yes.
Let us know if you can hear him.
Yes.
Hello, Professor, can you hear me?
Very just.
Hi. I found very interesting your presentation, and within it, I'm rather interested in you elaborating a bit more on your thoughts on the French position in the next few years, within or out of the Eurozone. Can you deepen a little bit your view on where French is going to go in the next few years within this framework?
So I think there are two possible ways in which France will go. First of all, I think the political situation has really become.
Yes.
First of all, I think the political situation has really become very difficult in France, and that Hollande is looking for some serious reshaping of the dice as far as the Eurozone is concerned. There are two possible ways in which France can go. One way is to change the way in which European government within the Eurozone works, which would be a way of bringing the ECB under Draghi into a much more activist position, much more like the Fed or the Bank of England, concerned about unemployment and growth and not just about holding down the rate of inflation. It would very likely also mean some sort of role, if there is a move towards a more common fiscal policy, a bigger role which France would play in orchestrating that common fiscal policy. That's one way. Second way is that there'll be some split between the north of Europe and southern Europe led by France. That's what I think is.
Okay? Yes. Can you hear us, Professor? Professor, can you hear us?
Can you hear that, David?
Professor, can you hear us now? Hello, Professor, can you hear us now?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear us now?
Hello?
Yes, David. Hello. David? Yes, can you hear us now maybe? No. The thing is...
We have
Can you maybe hear us now? David, can you maybe hear us now?
Okay.
Yes? Can you maybe hear us now?
Hello.
Can you maybe hear us now? Yeah, you can do it. Μπορεί να πάρει τηλεφωνία. Έχει κάτι που να πει. Yes, maybe you can hear us now. She's right, yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah, hey.
Yes, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Now let's try to
let them move.
yeah, make the least possible moves now. So if you could repeat the last part of your answer, the scenario B.
The south and north divide.
Yes, but don't move that very much because you can.
No, I sort of see as two key possibilities. One, that France really forces Germany, both in this common fiscal framework that it develops, to enable France to take a leading role in some form or another using the public sector to stimulate demand, or perhaps tax us to stimulate demand. And at the same time as that, changing the ECB from being essentially a replication of the Bundesbank, concerned only with keeping down inflation, into becoming, as Draghi very clearly wants, something much more like the Fed or the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, where there is a concern and an activist concern about unemployment just as much as about inflation. I put that sort of joint development between France and Germany, but which would then, of course, bring very much Southern Europe into play, or a situation where the Eurozone breaks into a Northern Eurozone and a Southern Eurozone, and where the Southern Eurozone is in effect run by or led by or dominated by France, but would include Italy and Spain, as well as Greece and Portugal. And in both scenarios.
Yes.
Hello?
Hello? Yes, we can hear you well.
Can you?
Yes, we
hear
can.
me?
Yes.
I mean, in both scenarios, I see a role for a much more worked out policy which would integrate structural reform with the growth process, and in which the public sector would almost inevitably have to play a larger role than it plays at the moment.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we have another question from Professor Fernando Vallespin. If you would like to send on the mic.
Yeah. Well, this question is again on France. I'm not quite convinced on what you were saying. And the first thing that strikes me is really what Hollande is doing. And what Hollande is doing is not doing anything, apparently. So it seems that France has not yet decided what its path is going to be in the next months or the next years. And this is somehow striking, because what we were expecting is a very active French government fostering growth policies and countering austerity measures. So, but broke down. Simply pronounce it down.
Hi.
Yes, can you hear us now? Yes, David, can you hear us now? David, sorry, we can't hear. Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
When we talk about, let's just play around and get this right. And I'll come back on later, maybe on Sunday when you do your roundup.
Okay, let's try that. Yeah, it seems that it's we have the economic problems. Anyway, thank you very much for the intervention. It's getting quite difficult to continue the very nice discussion here. It's stimulating. So thank you very much in any case. I hope you hear me. I'm not sure you hear me, but in any case, thank you very much. And we'll continue our discussions probably in London sometime. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much.
We'll leave you on, just in case you want to intervene afterwards with the next presentations, or if you want to ask something, in any case. So you will be on, just in case.
Right. Now, we can move swiftly from now on to the next sort of intervention from John Stevens. That has kindly agreed to come once again at a forum organized by the Greek Public Policy Forum. For those of you who remember, the idea behind this is to bring the various debates that take place within the various national borders and try to create bridges. John Stevens, a former MEP for the Conservative Party and a very active participant in the debate in the United Kingdom about the future of Britain in the UK, has been instrumental in creating the monetary union, has been involved in the process leading to that, and also has been as a practitioner involved in the financial sector, so he has a lot of many things to say wearing various hats. Thank you very much. Of course, yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm not going to use any technology of any kind. I'm just going to talk. So I hope that's understandable. So it's a very, very, very pleasure to be here. I feel slightly odd being British when it's been said that Britain, of course, is completely irrelevant to this issue because we're not in the euro. And I agree with those who say that one of the underlying themes of this crisis is that the eurozone is becoming a real euro. And there is a big question mark hanging over everything else. And I might want to come on to that later on. I thought I would talk about the Greek revival in Germany as a starting off point, which might seem a curious title, but the Greek revival that I'm thinking of is one which a German academic friend of mine is working on, which is the tremendous influence of the discovery of ancient Greece in the creation of liberalism in Germany during the Napoleonic Wars. And I mention this because when we're thinking about to what extent is the Eurozone a crisis that is also an opportunity, and thinking of Manmosh's challenge to us, if we didn't do the right things, didn't get it right when things were good, how on earth do we get things right when things were bad? What I want to put forward to you is the lesson of the creation of German liberalism, inspired by ancient Greek architecture, people like Schinkel, people like von Stein, who was the great architect of Prussia's revival during the Napoleonic War. There's the moment when he received the news that Prussia had been defeated by Napoleon in October 1806 at the Battle of Jena, which was the greatest disaster that had befallen Prussia. Here was a state that defined itself by its military success, defeated in 4 hours, absolutely crushed, and was the beginning of a process of profound humiliation, but which also was the process of renewal of the Prussian state that laid the foundations of German unity. And when he received the news of this defeat, everybody around him was astonished because he was completely calm. He said, "Now at last can Germany be built." Because he understood that only by the humiliation and the destruction of all the old and encrusted structures of the Prussian state, only by a galvanizing experience of disaster, staring disaster in the face, could the necessary political will and popular culture actually be created which laid the foundations of Germany. There's absolutely no doubt that it was the disaster of the defeats in the Napoleonic War that laid the foundations of the creation of Germany. Without that, it would never have happened. And it was a truly political revolution, inspired by, as I said, very much aesthetically inspired by the example of a revival of ancient Greek architecture. To what extent is this can we look at this being an opportunity that is going to be, this experience has been so searing that it is going to create a European demos? That to me is the issue. And I think it is important to understand that this is a political crisis in the first order. It is a political crisis in a number of ways. It is, in the biggest terms, the crisis of the euro, and this entire global financial crisis, is a political crisis in the sense that it has marked the moment when it has become clear to very, very large numbers of people the mismatch in power between financial markets, the internationalization of finance, and the fact that politics has remained national. And that is the true crisis of democracy, because democracy has meaning if it has power. And the fact is that voting has become largely irrelevant for many people, because it makes no difference to the forces that determine people's lives. The things that really matter to people, what their pension is going to be, what their wage is going to be, will they have a job, is not really anymore in the gift of democratic political processes. That is the true crisis. And that is the importance of what we're doing. The Euro crisis is truly a battle for democracy, in the sense that if we win and create an international democracy that is capable of managing international markets and international finance, then democracy is safe. And if we fail, then it is quite clear that the future of democracy is at risk. And it's a risk not just at a technical level, it's a risk also in its economic and social foundations, because the other feature of this crisis in the West has been the squeeze of the middle class. And the middle class have been the principal carriers of democratic values and liberal values. And the extent to which globalization, by increasing income inequality, by favouring a globalized, increasingly ruthless elite that is able to avoid tax, to avoid regulation, and has squeezed incomes in the middle of society. And of course, the way in which that has been masked over the last 30 years, the way in which standards of living have been maintained, this is true in America as much as it's been in Europe, has been by the acquisition of debt. So in a sense, the debt crisis has grown out of the process of globalization, which has squeezed the middle class, and the evasion of that squeezing has been the accumulation of large amounts of debt, both public and private. So what is at stake here is our capacity to restore democracy. So we ask the question, is it possible to create from this crisis, a European demos. And I think we already see the extent to which this crisis has opened up the political debate in a whole range of countries, and not just those actually in the Eurozone. It is now possible to face up to issues that have been ignored for a very long time. Well, it looks at Greece or Italy or Spain. The extent to which questions are now being asked and are now possible to be debated and looked at in the face, comparing to where we were 2-3 years ago, this transformation is enormous. And also the restoration of a genuine political debate. One of the features of the progressive eclipse of democracy during the boom years was the absence, the end of ideology. That you had choices between political parties which were not really that significant. It was a sort of managerialism had entered in. Now at least one is having a discussion about whether it is austerity or whether it's going to be growth, whether it's Keynesianism or not. These are serious debates coming back. And that is a tremendous gain. Now the question is, can that be transposed to a European level? And I suppose really what I wanted to do was to go through what I think are the prerequisites of having a European demos. And what I'm trying to set out is what would be a narrative for that. Because, of course, we can talk about institutions. We can see that all the national political institutions have been humiliated by this process. But also, of course, European institutions have been humiliated by this process. I mean, the eclipse of the credibility of the Commission is a very striking feature of this process. The eclipse of the European Parliament is perhaps even more striking. And one of the things that I worked for very, very much in the run-up to the creation of the euro was the fact that the European Parliament would be the only institution that would conduct hearings with the President of the European Central Bank. And that was a monopoly that I thought would be the one thing that could give the European Parliament a real role. Well, that has been completely wasted. I mean, the failure of the European Parliament to be any sort of voice in this crisis is staggering. And when last week, Signor Draghi announced that he was going to talk to the Bundestag, I thought that was a pretty fatal moment, because once you've got the President of the European Central Bank on Bundestag, he's going to get the Assemblée Nationale all the way to start. I mean, that is an enormous defeat for the European Parliament. I just give that as one instance, and there are other problems with that institution. But so, I mean, the crisis of democratic institutions is not just about national ones, it's also about European ones too. So what is needed before we talk about institutional arrangements is we need to work out what the narrative is to advance this sense of a European demos. And I think I think there are four elements that I'd like to put in front of you this afternoon. And the first one is simply a sense of shared fate. And that, I think, we have seen in this crisis. I mean, whether you're looking at the protests by the Finnish nationalists, or whether you're looking at reactions in the German CSU, or whether you're looking at the debate here in Greece, or what's been happening in Italy and the rest, I mean, there is a sense within the Eurozone of all being in this together. People may not like being there together. In fact, a lot of them don't. But that the euro has bound people together in a common fate. What happens now in France or in Germany or in the Dutch elections or Greek elections really matters quite across the eurozone. That is understood, I think, to a degree, but never before. Now, can that be built upon? But that is an enormous start. An enormous start. And I think it leads on to the second point, that this debate in politics, a real debate between left and right, is now being played out to a degree at a European level. And what Professor Sostis was saying, that there is now a sort of French socialist view of Europe, which wants a more Keynesian approach, a more growth-emphasizing approach, feature supported by Labour Party in Holland supported to a degree, and I think Holland's playing of this has been quite skillful by the Social Democrats of Germany. There is a sense that, so I don't accept that this analysis, that this north-south element is, I think here it plays that. What you've got is the beginnings of a transnational political play. And equally, you have an alternative. I mean, the defeat of Sarkozy in France, I think will come to be seen not as being a problem for the euro, but it will be the moment when the euro's solution to the euro crisis took on a more left-wing form than it would otherwise have done. Now, it's interesting, politicians, I think, have been somewhat behind the curve in doing this than their electorates. I mean, there was a very interesting moment in the beginning of the year in the French presidential election campaigns, when it did seem, like it was widely discussed, both in Paris and Berlin, that Chancellor Merkel would be supporting overtly Sarkozy in his election campaign. There was a talk about one of Sarkozy's platforms was going to be that France should be more like Germany, need to be more competitive reforms, the sort of things that have been going on in Germany needs to happen in France. And at the end of the day, Sarkozy's advisors stepped back from that. But some of them, I know now, regret that decision and think that that was the moment they lost it. Now, whereas Hollande won in a very traditional political fashion by staying within a national debate. But I think this beginnings of a true transnational left-right debate is a very encouraging sign. Whether the extent to which it can be built on, we'll have to see. But certainly for politicians to get elected now, increasingly within the Eurozone, an absolute precondition will be their capacity to deal transnationally. Their political alliances, their ability to protect their own people by having credibility in a European context. And I think that's one of the reasons why you saw the result that you did in Holland. It was precisely because the opponents of the European project of the euro had no real transnational credibility at all. There was no alternative option. They were, and ultimately, democratic politics is about the capacity to deliver, to solve problems. The third element, which is certainly very true, looking at the lesson of the creation of German consciousness in the beginning of the 19th century, is you need common enemies. You need internal enemies who can be mobilized against, and you need external enemies. And we're beginning to see this. I mean, I'm slightly nervous when I was introduced as partly a banker. Being a banker is a very unpopular thing anywhere, and attacking bankers has become part of this general debate. But I mean, attacking tax evaders, attacking inefficient civil servants, attacking clientism in politics, corruption. I mean, this as a sort of galvanization of the debate and a positive encouragement of a sort of Manichaean view in politics is certainly anybody who thinks that one can create a European demos without having a serious narrative about enemies and about good and bad is a delusion. But it is coming. The other feature, of course, is external enemies. And here, I think there is a perception that, again, which has been played to a degree by Chancellor Merkel and some of the dialogues, certainly in the French presidential elections, saw a bit of this, the sense that the rise, the real significance of the global economic crisis has been an unprecedented shift of economic and therefore political power from west to east, the rise of Asia, the challenge of China, and all of that. How this narrative is developed is a very interesting question. But that is going to be an important theme in talking about a Europe. there is also a shadow side of this, of course. Because in a lot of the analysis that people do of who are the pro-European forces, who are the anti-European forces, and you look at some of the parties in the Netherlands, for example, the anti-Islam, the Islamist element, is seen to be associated very much with an anti-European opinion. Well, in some respects it is, yes, but in other respects it isn't. And we have to recognize that the process towards creating a European consciousness is going to have a lot of dark sides to it, as well as light sides to it. The challenge for liberal democratic politicians is how to ride these forces. Because when one starts talking in terms of the need for enemies, it is obvious that this is the way in which, to a degree, this debate is being done, but it is equally obvious that for anyone who cherishes the values of Europe, the values of democracy, that the ability to master these processes, to preserve a liberal European agenda in this context is absolutely vital. And that comes back to the final point, which is having a proper narrative about economic performance and growth. Because unless you have that, then the chances are that forces that are being unleashed, so even if they may be tending in a European direction, will the darker side of these processes will triumph. And I absolutely agree with those who say that the problem of the debate at the moment is that without a growth agenda of some kind, without some prospect that economic performance is going to improve, that all the present plans are potentially vitiated, and that is where the real danger lies. And I don't want to address this in terms of which side of the debate I would be over austerity versus fiscal expansion or Keynesianism, but I think I'd rather do it in the sense that what is missing at the moment, it seems to me, is again a narrative of a European, of the upside of this crisis, the potential of the European economy. I think that is not fully understood. We're going back to why people created the euro in the beginning. There were a whole range of factors, obviously. From a purely economic point of view, one very dominant argument was a simple comparison between the European economy and the United States. And the fact is that certainly compared to the Eurozone, the Eurozone has got a population somewhat larger than the United States, and it has a GDP somewhat smaller than the United States. But the differences are not enormous. I mean, these are two regions that are performing more or less in a comparable fashion. That should tell us the scale of the opportunity that exists if the European economy was much more integrated than it now is. It's enormous. It's enormous. And I mean, just take the debate about the banking union. And one of the factors that has emerged out of this is that there are 6,000 banks in the Eurozone. 6,000 banks. Well, how many do you need in an integrated economy? I mean, leaving aside the debate about whether banks have been large and whether we should be having Glass-Steagall and all these other things. I mean, you clearly be very clear is the answer. And the potential in increasing performance and efficiency of that nationalisation is enormous. And you can say the same going right across the sectors in the European economy. I mean, there is every reason to suppose that if we master the euro crisis, if we have a level of integration which is even approaching that presently existing in the United States, Europe will be the most prosperous and largest and most powerful economy on the planet. And again, this sort of sense that the future belongs to the East or the future belongs to emerging markets. I mean, speaking simply from investment, I would say that the major advantages of investing in BRICS, so-called, has largely passed. The periods of very high growth in China are largely over. There are a whole range of technological reasons, quite not going into why simply low labour costs are no longer going to be the driving factor. The idea that Europe doesn't have a significant economic future, that we're too old or too decadent or too tired or all the rest, is complete nonsense. There is every reason to suppose that if we are able to master this crisis, the future performance of this part of the world will be better than anywhere else. And that's what people need to be told. And that's even in the case of looking at economies like Greece or Spain. There is the potential from proper investment, from a shift towards retirement, healthcare, all these other things, which would be tremendously suited to these economies, is enormous. And so I do think it is staggering that the worst consequence of the national focus of our political debate at the moment is its inability to see the opportunities that scale provides. And that's really where the debate needs to be. I'm particularly struck in Spain, the contrast between the debate that existed in the run-up to Europe is that Spain made tremendous sacrifices to join Europe. But then the prize was clearly in sight for joining, and therefore that made those sacrifices possible. The danger now, as you've got in Greece and Spain and elsewhere, is that we're looking, in terms of the public debate, down a tunnel with no end. And that people have got to see a prize. And that to me is the real challenge. So having a sense of shared fate, having a common European level debate between left and right that is real, that is tangible, it's transnational party politics, certainly accepting that part of this debate is going to be a sense of outrage about how we got into this mess and who the guilty parties are, having enemies. But also having a sense of what the challenges are for Europe in the wider global context. And finally, having a sense of and the development perhaps of new incentives. I just make one comment of one innovation from the treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, that I think is much underrated in this regard, which is the possibility of citizens' initiatives, of the possibility of transnational, European-wide referendums. At the moment, this hasn't really emerged. There was some suggestion that it might happen over the transaction tax promoted by the socialist groups. I can imagine there are some issues which this could be a very powerful factor. I just name one, because I think which is trade policy. Because I do actually think that one of the things that has not been debated in terms of the mixed policies that might emerge to create, to revive European growth and also create a sense of shared European identity is a much more robust external trade policy. Not strictly protectionist, but one which is able to deliver and target more. This is the trade in the world. This is trade taboo. The trade policy is not something which one's supposed to talk about. Everyone accepts that free trade is here forever. And it is true that protectionist pressures up until now have been perhaps anything surprisingly not so strong. But if we look at the tone of the American presidential election debate, just recently, the attitude towards China, it seems to me inevitable that management of trade, given the fact that stimulus through deficits things has been stretched to the limit by government borrowing, that clearly simply an austerity program is not going to be enough. At some stage, the other leg, which is positively encouraging import substitution, is going to be deployed. It's going to be deployed in America and will probably be deployed here. And that is a very powerful form of a sense of shared European solidarity. It's the one policy which is genuinely a European one, leave aside Europe, is the common external trade policy. And it would be astonishing if the tides of populism in our democratic debate did not flow in that direction at some point. And it is, after all, worth remembering if we're looking about the creation of a sense of the United States identity or creation of a German identity. It was the road of trade policy. Both of those was very significant. I just want to finish on where this leads my own country. I do think that the British policy of being in Europe but not really part of it, which has prevailed for the last 30 years, is now coming to a moment of truth. The Eurozone will become, in my view, much more integrated over the next 4 or 5 years. This will mean that the choice in Britain is no longer some form of continuing relation. It is either to be right in or right out. And this is complicated, of course, by the internal debate we had over the position of Scotland. And one of the emerging powerful arguments in favour of European engagement in Europe is that it's the only way to keep the British Union together. But equally, we should not underestimate the extent to which in the British Conservative, the English Conservative Party, English nationalism is very powerful. And there are far too many Conservative members of Parliament who now think that the only way of guaranteeing a majority of the next election is to lose Scotland, which would be true, because the Conservatives only have one member of Parliament in Scotland, and the Labour Party have 46. So, and this idea of English nationalism is very closely linked to ideas of leaving Europe altogether. And this is going to be a tremendous debate. So in some respects, the more the euro crisis diminishes for you, the greater it will become for us. And this will be partly in terms of the loss of a safe haven status for our investments. I mean, one of the reasons why British interest rate, English interest rate, the sterling interest rates have been so low is because of the euro crisis. And I think the combination of a loss of safe haven status and an emergence of a debate about where we belong in the world, a strategic debate, which is likely to make international investors quite nervous, that I think is a real problem, which I anticipate coming over the next 3 years. I do remain optimistic. I think that for a whole range of reasons that we're happy to go into, I do actually believe that at the end of the day, Britain, and not just England, I don't think that Scottish independence is going to come. I think there will be major constitutional reform in Britain, but that's a different matter. At the end of the day, I think that Britain will move to be right-in for a whole range of reasons. But it's going to be the most monumental battle. And if you have had, and are having, and will continue to have, an enormous battle over preserving the euro, remaining in the euro, making it work, that, I think, may be as nothing compared to the battle which is about to start in Britain over where we belong. I mean, it's one thing knowing what your overall strategy is and then working out technically how you can actually manage to do it, difficult though that is essentially the issue facing all members of the Eurozone at the moment. The British problem is a much deeper one, which is we don't know what strategy our strategy is. That is much more fundamental. But finally, I would say when I'm not thinking about politics or economics or whether to buy European banks, bank shares, I write about, I'm in the process of researching the life of St. Paul, if possible. And I would just point out that among the many lessons of that complicated story is the fact that converts tend to be quite powerful when they get on board. And I do actually anticipate that when people in Germany and France will say, wouldn't it be nice to have a really pro-European Britain? Well, I just wonder, I think you may find that in a strange way, that if the British were finally to decide
that they were going to be right in the euro, right in Europe, they would be pretty convinced of it. That's my view.
Thank you very much for this very insightful intervention. What I propose to do is, because obviously we are running a bit late, is to move with the following two interventions without taking any questions. So keep your questions, and then perhaps we will address them individually or to the panel members afterwards. We move swiftly to the intervention, yes, of Professor Martin Trivers, who is the manifestation of transnationalism himself, a German national.
That I have here, indeed, at the end of the month of September, I feel absolutely treated here. I really have to say that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you a particularly German paper on a German topic, and not on Germany as a whole, but I think of a quite important section of it. I was asked to speak specifically about the German Christian Democrats, Angela's party, the party of Chancellor Angela Merkel, their position on the position of Germany, and their position on Europe, and therefore also their position on Greece. And I think it's fair to say that probably their position on Greece has very, very recently changed, probably only last week or so, where they moved from what used to be called a chain theory, whereby the euro is like a chain, and it's only as strong as its weakest link, therefore the weakest link, Greek, should be removed. I think that was the attitude at least until earlier last week. And now they seem to have changed to the domino theory, meaning if Greece falls, it would be the first domino and the whole thing breaks apart, meaning that it's very likely that we will hear, we've already started to hear much softer tones from Berlin, and I think now it's quite a determined German policy to keep Greece in, even if that costs a lot of money. Let me speak about Angela's party, therefore. If you've got a picture of a slightly satirical picture of the Chancellor, you wouldn't believe what kind of pictures you find on the internet of the Chancellor. I have no idea. I was actually contemplating putting more on my slides, but perhaps that underlines the whole paper. Okay. CDU and CSU, because they're essentially a permanently bound alliance of two parties. They are Christian, Democratic, and Union. First thing that I think it's a Greek party with that name, so there's still a German word in there, but it is indeed a German party. In 15 of Germany's 16 states, it's called CDU, and it's also called like that at the federal level. It is certainly the centre-right, the Conservative Party, but it's not like the British Conservative Party or other Conservative parties. It is a popular party. I didn't find a Greek word for that, but it certainly makes sense in the Spanish context, even in the French context. It means basically we're not representing one part of society, we're trying to encompass everybody. Farmers, workers, small and medium-sized enterprises, and the rich and famous as well. There's even a trade union movement, the CBA, inside the CDU. And it's a very social party as well. And I think that the word Christian got into the name of the party also from the very beginning as a kind of left-leaning message, actually, because there are various other names possible. It's called Democratic. In Bavaria, it's a slightly different name, CSU, the Christian Social Union. They basically have an agreement. 15 states are what's called the CDU, and Bavaria is called the CSU. CSU will not put up candidates in the other 15 states, and the CDU will not put up candidates in Bavaria. It's kind of, it's a nice German word called Staatsragend, and I think it's like carrying the state of the constitution, and that's very much how the CDU sees itself. It's not a nationalist party as such, but it's certainly patriotic. Yeah? Where the Social Democrats sing their song, I don't know what it's called, it's the national anthem it's sung at the end of the party convention at the CDU. It's that kind of thing. I think they're kind of in the same way as the ND in Greece in any case. It's a union founded in the mid-40s, right after the 0 hour, after the Second World War. And union is supposed to mean Catholics and Protestants. So it's not supposed to be a confessional party. You know, Germans about 50-50, Catholic, Protestant. Before the war, there was always a very strong, what's called the Centre Party, a Catholic party, and they didn't want, only towards the end of the Weimar Republic, they started to open towards Protestants, and then about 2 or 3 smaller Protestant parties, and it was a part of that weakness that was considered to be a problem for functioning democracy. We need a centre-right party that can actually really be in government, and it's not just a party. Okay. It is also very often referred to simply as the union, and that's quite different to the English context where the union is something entirely different. It's trade. Okay, it's the party of government, I think is fair to say. I think if at least at the federal level, when they're not in government, they're kind of melancholic, they have a depression. They ruled for the first 20 years of the existence of the current republic, from 49 to 69, under 3 different chancellors and in completely different combinations. Then again from 82 to 98, all 16 years under Kohl, and now again since 2005. They, apart from 1953 to 57, where they actually had an absolute majority, and I think it's fair to say that to this point they are the only, although they're far away from that, but they're probably the only party that could possibly even ever get an absolute majority at the federal level. And it's the only party that ever managed that, but even that only for one period. They normally work together in coalitions, preferably with the Liberals, the FDP, if necessary with the SPD. The elections of 2009 show a picture that will not again happen next year in September, pretty much in 1 year there will be elections. The union with both its parties only at 33.8%. And actually many people say that it's Angela Merkel's fault, and they're not very happy with her about bringing in such low results. It's a very low result for the Christian Democrats. But that was wonderfully compensated with a historical victory for the Liberal Party with 14.6%. That will not happen again either. But basically that meant that the two could run together, because there are so many parties that don't get it. It's 47% is about enough to get the majority. SPD, historically low, very bad results, 23. The Left Party at 11.9 and the Greens at 10.7. I think that's the trend, the current trend. It's moving around a bit. The current trend for 2013. I don't think that will be the result, but it's kind of giving you an indication. And it's also giving you an indication how Merkel thinks, because she has to face elections in 1 year. These are her figures, and she can do the maths and know who she has to work with. She's definitely not going to win an absolute majority, that's for sure. But 36.8 is not so bad. At the beginning of the summer sunset, even 39, and that's as good as it got since the 90s. It's an excellent result. Yeah. 28 for the SPD also. There seems to be a move back to the big parties. That's a good result. The Greens, 13.6, very good. But you have to result that after Fukushima and all that political phase, they were at 21, 22. And even won the elections in Baden-Württemberg. There's now a prime minister from the Green Party in Baden-Württemberg, which is normally a safe CDU state. The left with 6.5, they're currently in the process of destroying them themselves without outside help. They should do that by themselves. The FDP at 4.4, although I think that is going to move up quite a bit over the next few months. However, I don't see them more than 6-7%. They definitely won't get 7 in the next election. And a new party, which we don't know that much about yet, the Pirate Party, which is predicted to enter into the federal parliament next time. And that kind of messes things up a bit. What you see, if you do the math, the current coalition doesn't have a majority anymore. Possibilities are that the CDU will be the strongest party. So Merkel will probably stay in power unless that SPD Green thing goes up a bit. And they just about make it with a very, very thin majority. At the moment, it more looks like it's a bit of a hung parliament, so that, well, then there would be a possibility to go with the Greens. The leadership would probably like to do that, but the base, which is very strong, absolutely doesn't want to do that. They definitely don't want to work with the Christian Democrats. So that probably we're steering towards a coalition with the SPD at the moment, unless the figures work out that perhaps some parties dramatically change. What does the CDU think about the European Union, European integration? And I was quite impressed. I thought now you have to translate part of the CDU program, the manifesto. I didn't have to do that. It's actually on their website in English, and not bad English at that, actually. It says in point 312, the CDU is the German Party for Europe. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. Yeah. SPD is not anti-European. The FDP is not anti-European. The Greens are not anti-European. But okay, that's how they see themselves. From the outset, it has spearheaded passionately the unification process in Europe. Introduced courageously by Konrad Adenauer and further deepened by Helmut Kohl after the German reunification, we are committed to the continuation of the integration of Europe. The European Union is in the interest of all member states and their citizens. Europe's strength is also Germany's chance. I think that's not just programmatic blah blah. This is definitely the attitude towards European integration. There might be nuances where there are discrepancies, but overall it's fair to say it is an extremely pro-European party, and it's proven to be like that, especially under Helmut Kohl and also under It's true, very often said, that the euro was the price Germany had to pay for reunification to France, but there isn't actually that much disconcern with the euro. Germany, I think, is quite happy with the currency. There was a long period at the beginning, euro toil war, basically, everything is getting more expensive, but that actually was an experience across the Eurozone. Sovereignty. Well, what do I see for the next 2 years? The policy of the current government of Christian Democrats and Liberals, and all possible governments from next year, either Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, Green, although I find that quite unlikely, or of Social Democrats and Green, because the Green Party and the SPD in their stance towards Europe is not, or the Euro, it's not too different. The transfer of sovereignty to the EU was, is, and will be necessary. Any government, federal government, would say that. Political union will be supported. In fact, I think for many it's not going fast enough. There's a policy to save and strengthen the euro and keeping all current members, including Greece, I think that only since August, since September, in the common currency, and, interesting point as well, bringing Poland in as quickly as possible as well. Problems that might arise is that in the current coalition, the parties that possibly are going to be more anti-European or more critical is the CSU, because they also have elections next year, and they really have a very good, for the first time, the Bavarian Social Democrats have a really good candidate, and might actually just, probably with the help of all the other parties, just have a majority. And that would be basically the political death of anybody leading the CSU at the moment, especially the Prime Minister, and he doesn't want that, so he's going to probably use any kind of means to use a bit of populism in order to get re-elected. The FDP, I'm not sure, also might actually, there are a lot of things to be sorted out in that party as well, and they might, I mean the press at least says that there might be a slightly more anti-European stance to position the FDP and bring it back into Parliament. Yeah, what is going to happen, European Central Bank, that's a slightly old ultra-virus with their purchases recently, because of course a government of a member state of the EU doesn't just have to swallow that. They could go for an action for a moment in the European Court of Justice, but I find that is highly unlikely. That's not going to happen. What would actually be the effect of the political landscape in Germany if actually they would have to pay first installment of several billion euros to bail out Greece? I think ultimately that wouldn't have such a huge effect. An economic downturn in 2013 is a possibility. Orders in German companies have gone down and they're starting to complain. What's going to happen to Spain? What's going to happen to Italy? What's going to happen to Greece? However, actually when we talk about democracy and sovereignty here, perhaps my last slide, I should talk about, since I'm a law professor, so it will allow me to kind of deviate a bit from the CDU, the political topic. The Federal Constitutional Court, and I've got the decision here, all 46 pages of it. I read it on the flight here. It was a 3.5 hours flight. It was just about enough to read this judgment. I'm not sure it was enough to fully digest it. It is not a judgment along the lines of importance of the, if you're familiar with the case law of the Constitutional Court about European integration, Solana 1, Solana 2, Maastricht and Lisbon, where it's basically all about protecting the human rights catalogue of the German constitution against an insufficiently secured European Union. The Constitutional Court is the watchdog of German sovereignty. We, Maastricht judgment, we are in a dialogue with the European Court of Justice on equal terms. I'm not sure that Luxembourg will see it the same way. And very big in the Lisbon judgment very recently, if the German people or parliament want to remove the control of the Constitutional Court, well, they're welcome to do so, but not on the basis of the current constitution. In that case, we would have to found a new Third Republic. The judgment from last week is important, I think, in 2 points. And by the way, it's only a summary. It's only summary proceedings. Although, as integrated into the summary proceedings, they already made a full legal analysis. First of all, they say that the ESM is constitutional, and I think everybody is hearing that because that's kind of the thing you want to hear. Yeah, that's all across Europe. Yeah, it's constitutional, and that is discussed. But actually, the applicants didn't lose their case completely, because when you read the entire judgment, you see that the Constitutional Court is actually rather critical about the current arrangements, and is putting a very important 190 billion cap on their judgments, meaning we reject all the applications, we declare that the ESM is constitutional under the German constitution, but only up to 190 million euros. So the arrangements for anything that would go beyond that might actually be different. The problem here is especially that the German parliament is losing the sovereignty over its budget. That is actually in the end no longer a question whether it's no longer a question of the German Bundestag to decide whether money is spent on anything really, but it's becoming something that is forced upon the German budget by supranational structures. That's it. Currently, the whole package is 700 billion euros, and the German part of it, that we already know. That's already too late as well, and that's been decided on, and the Bundestag decided on it. And the German part of that is 190 billion. They're about 30%, something in that range. So, how did they justify this? What is the justification is that anyway, here, you have to forgive me that I haven't fully digested the whole thing, but the justification ultimately is that for that money, there is already parliamentary authority authorization through the law, but that there's, and that is okay, and it's actually something that will hit in the course of the current parliament until before September next year, whereas anything that would go beyond that would actually commit future parliaments, and that would basically mean it doesn't matter what the German voter says in September, that money has to go, no matter what the future parliament might decide. Right, I hope that gave an insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we could now move to the intervention of Professor Bruno Valle-Spin, that
very much obviously from another gyps, as we like to call European countries, both politically correct. And then we could have, we will open the debates.
Thank you. Well, I think I'll start with the last thing you said, you just said. I remember the magistrate Di Fabio, who was the one in charge of the the decision of the Lisbon Treaty, was recently in Madrid, and he defended the position of the German Constitutional Court in terms of the defense of democracy. And I was somewhat puzzled then how can democracy be defended when we have to decide on things that have more to do with our common interdependencies than about domestic issues. And so I asked him, so if this is your position, why felt Merkel and Sarkozy legitimized to take the phone and call Papandreou when he menaced, to make a referendum in Greece? Aren't the Greek people stubborn enough in order to take a decision? What you claim about Germany, you don't claim about other European countries because they are economically dependent on you. So how do we get out of this incongruence? Because I think this is really the point, one of the main points here. And I leave it here because we can pick it up later on in the discussion. Because I think some of the main problems that I see regarding democratic legitimacy have to do with two separate issues. The first would be the position between legitimacy and efficiency, which is of course the technocratic question. And I think in this sense, and I would say this aloud, is that in Spain we are fulfilling all the requisites of democratic legitimacy. But at the same time, we are deeply envying Italy for having a technocrat. And it's, maybe another technocrat would have made it as well. But so this, and why? So because this is really a contradiction. Because apparently we should be happy to have a party that has obtained an absolute majority in parliament, who can really decide what ought to be decided. But on the other hand, we realize what it's being decided, it's not efficient. So it's a political government, it's not a technocratic government, although they claim to they claim to undertake technocratic decisions. And this is quite interesting because from what we have seen in Italy so far and in Spain, I think this comparison is quite interesting. Spain is, the Spanish government is looking more at the Spanish population, the Spanish demos, than at Europe in order to organize the whole economic system. Whereas the Italian, government, Monti, is moving from one country to the other in Europe. It's moving, it's constantly in Brussels. It's doing European diplomacy instead of internal politics. And so in that sense, I think when, in this crisis situation, there are incentives on part of most of the political actors to be, you could say, anti-efficient. So you have an opposition, which always would say that what you do is wrong. You have an opposition in the Spanish case on part of the regions, of the autonomous communities, which have particularistic interests. We don't coincide necessarily with what has to be done for the country as a whole, and this creates disincentives, as I would say. And so this has provoked in my country, and I think this is our problem in Spain. This has provoked an increase, an incredible increase in popular alienation vis-à-vis the political class. So there's a sharp divorce between politicians and the people. And if you follow up the last polls, which you find, there was a poll quite recently, not one of the main Spanish politicians has gotten a mark that goes, that has, I mean, most of them had 2 out of 10 points. You know, if 10 is the best mark, and 0 the worst. So the average of for Rajoy, for the leader of the opposition, and for other political party leaders was around 2, 2.5, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, and not a single leader was approved by the voters, which is also fascinating. So this is, and this creates, I think, a very big problem, because suddenly, and this is one of the problems that we have to face now in our country, because suddenly you realize you don't have a system, a political system where there is a government and opposition, but you have a political system with an opposition outside of the system. So that's what we saw when after the Ignatius movement, the 15th of May movement, although the numbers were low, I mean, it was not a popular uprising, something like that. But what we saw was that suddenly there was an entrenched critique of the political system from outside itself, and that was new. And I think this has a lot to do with this lack of performance on part of the political class. So in a way, this then legitimizes democracy as a whole. I think this is very important to understand, because in a certain way, what people perceive is, first, no matter what politicians do, no matter what they decide, in the end, we're subject to other forces, market forces, and we are subject to the forces of the wealthiest countries in the Eurozone, particularly Germany. So somehow all the narrative that we had from what it meant to belong to Europe broke down. And that narrative was based on the idea that we share the European government, where we are part of it. So we contribute to this government. And suddenly we realize we're not being governed anymore by Brussels, but we're being governed by Frankfurt and Berlin. I mean, it's not that Frankfurt and Berlin wants to govern the European, the Eurozone, but it's simply, you know, the way things work. And it's simply, and then suddenly you realize you have another institution called Bundesverfassungsgericht in Karlsruhe, which doesn't, it's not in the constitution, which is not in the European constitution, but will affect your internal politics, your internal economic situation, more than whatever our Cortes, our parliament, decides. And I think this creates a certain malaise, you know, to use, I don't know the English translation of malaise, but you know, this the German word, Unbehagen, right? And I think that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. And so this has a lot to do with what we haven't still decided, how to organize the different units of democracy. Because in a country such as ours, what we find is simply that we don't know how to make responsible politicians accountable for what they do. I mean, how far is Rajoy accountable for what he does? How far is Merkel accountable for what she does for Spain? How far? I mean, how is Merkel being held accountable on part of Germany, not just because of what she does for German governments, but for what she does within European governments as a whole. And I think this is quite interesting. And this leads me to another point, which I think is crucial in this particular situation, which is simply the fact that we have broken down the idea on which democratic legitimacy is based. Democratic legitimacy is based on the idea that we have a say in those decisions that will affect us, or at least a small say in those decisions. And suddenly we realize that most of the decisions that affect us more decisively don't depend even on Berlin, but depend on so-called markets, financial markets. But financial markets cannot be held accountable politically. And then we change, you know, we change financial markets through countries. And this is very dangerous, because you need a fool, you know, you need someone who can blame. You can, of course, we blame first of all our government. That's why politicians have this reputation now in our country. But then you blame countries, you know, like Germany or even France. And I don't want to get back to France because no, we didn't end the discussion, you know, regarding Hollande and you know, what he's doing now at in Europe. So this leads me to a problem that I think is crucial now in Europe, which is I think we have to take a very tragic decision, a very dramatic decision, I would say, which is shall we keep a democratic governance as usual, as we're doing now, or are we going into this financial union, which will, as you said, which will lead eventually to an even closer political union? And I think that's here is where France's position deviates from Germany's position. Because I think the interesting thing about Hollande at the moment is that he opposes Germany's economic policies, but he opposes as well Germany's decision to go towards a greater fiscal union. I think France doesn't want to give away parts of its national sovereignty. And I think that's one of the main problems that we have now in Europe, because we have first a problem of what are the most rational economic policies to be taken at the moment, and then how can we redefine our economic institutions. So now we know we need you know, something like the Federal Reserve in the United States. And I think the point was well taken, that in the end we can't avoid comparing ourselves with the United States. But the problem is precisely what happens if there's not an understanding between the two most important European actors in the Eurozone, France and Germany, what is better. And I think that's exactly what's happening. And so I think until France doesn't move its position and states clearly what it really wants to do in this new constellation, so then we will still be stuck, you know, in this situation of incapability of doing things. And then I think we have another problem that creates a lot of distortions in the overall political situation, of which we haven't spoken here, but I think it's very present. And I perceive it not so much in the discourse of politicians, but I perceive it, you know, in simply listening to people or reading the comments of people that enter into web pages of the German press, or things like that. And that's, but you said it before, regarding the peaks, that's the cultural stereotypes. I think cultural stereotypes are back somehow. And they are very difficult to overcome. And so on. And we perceive this not just in Germany, but you know, they're back also in Spain. You know, we talked before regarding, you know, the new situation in Catalonia, which will probably switch soon to West country again, which is somehow we are the north within the Iberian Peninsula, and so we are the ones that give the money, and others are the ones that spend it unproductively, which is exactly the same discourse that we find within Europe. And this is not based solely on facts; it's based also on stereotypes. And I think those stereotypes ought to be I don't know what to use, ought to be destroyed, to be dissolved, if we really want to go on. As I said before, I'm rather optimistic at the moment. I'm very optimistic. I'm rather optimistic regarding the new economic situation. I'm not that optimistic regarding the political situation, because I think we still haven't solved this problem of which is the how to interconnect the different units of democracy. So how we decide at which level, and we haven't decided. But I think it's also a key issue, which is how far are we going to go in terms of, let's say, European levels. We go back again into the same problem. I mean, in the United States, you don't have you have differences in per capita income that are just as large as the ones we find in Europe. I mean, we have Alabama. If you compare Alabama to Massachusetts or New York State or something like that, the difference is higher than in Portugal and Germany, with an example. So you have backdrop states like California, and nothing happens. I mean, they have no problem because they're integrated into the same country.
That sounds right to me.
No, but I mean, the problem is they have a demos. I mean, they have a unitary demos, which we lack. So the main problem is how can we turn these cultural stereotypes, these differences in political culture, these differences in economic achievement, how can we turn them into something that may not endanger our path towards, the creation of that dams, or the creation of, let's say, a legitimate fiscal union, for instance. And in this sense, I think I saw an interview with Neil Ferguson recently in Spain, which I think he was asked something like that. So what's going to happen to Europe? Euro prices and all that. So, Neil Ferguson is now working for Mitt Romney. He's doing his campaign. Well, yeah, it's one of his intellectuals. In any case, what he said was something that I think is quite interesting. He said, in the Eurozone, in Europe, there are, how many, I don't know, 12 countries that have less than 6 million inhabitants. In China, there are 12 cities that have more than 7 million inhabitants. So, what are we going to do? I mean, we either react or we don't. And then the next question was, and this is for our British friend, the next question was, so what's Britain going to do? And he said, no, Britain, participates from afar. I mean, they won't mix into this absolutely necessary, European Union. So somehow we have these two Europes I referred to before, in my intervention, that are splitting slowly. I don't know what's going to happen with Poland, because Germany seems to have an enormous interest in putting Poland within, its area of influence. I think Spain made a terrible mistake not having, a long time ago, not having negotiated with certain union with Poland, because it has more or less the same demographic size as Spain. Yeah, so it's also objective conditions that would have helped us to make common policies within the European Union together. But we didn't at that time, and now it's too late. Now it has been already taken by Germany. So this is more or less what I wanted to what I wanted to say. I think our main problem is how do we? I think our main problem is, which is a problem of leadership. How do we tell our different demo that there's no other solution than following the path of an even greater union of the Eurozone, not just economically but politically? Because I think if there are problems, the main problems are going to be seen in this differences between the Euroscepticism, the growth of Euroscepticism. In that sense, I said I was optimistic because of the last lecture. I think they introduce a new kind of rationality that might help to introduce a different atmosphere. But in any case, and with this I will end. We need to find a middle path between legitimacy and efficiency, between technocracy and democracy, or whatever you like it. I don't think it's because now Italy has a problem of Gustavo may know it comes to that. What happens if Monti disappears? Right? And in our case, you know what happens if the Catalan issue gets tough or tougher? Or what happens if our political class keeps on, because this is, I think, a crucial issue. So why do politicians lose legitimacy in political? I don't think it's strictly a Spanish issue. I think it's an issue that affects also other crisis ridden countries.
Thank you very much. As we realize, we are running a bit late, and there is another panel that follows. What I suggest is we take 2 questions. Then we'll have a 5-minute break that will enable us to attend a second, hopefully successful link with Mr. Kazimarkakis from Brussels. The good thing with the structure of the seminar of this 2-day meeting is that we have enough, we build enough cushion for time depth as we start having today. Tomorrow we have, that's the whole point of the roundtable. So a lot of the questions perhaps that we could discuss today, surely we could also do that tomorrow. So, who would like to ask the first question? He asks first.
I'm going to be brief again. I guess I'm referring to...
Actually, let's make it 10 minutes because...
Yeah, very brief. Yeah, I want to kind of refer to, I think, John's comment on the sort of transnationalization of debate across Europe, which I think is actually happening. It's a process already in progress, although it might be quite rife with stereotypes that are sort of bounced around. The question is, what actually varies a lot as countries is the level of extremism and polarization in the debate. I think you all know what happened in Greece, right? I mean, in the last elections, both the right wing and the left wing, the extreme right and the extreme left, were experiencing a very high rise in support. My interpretation of this is actually what has been already mentioned, that I think the process of integration and the crisis have basically strained national democracies to their limits. So what actually matters the most in people's daily lives cannot be tackled by domestic elites and national governments. It can only be tackled at the European level. So the question is, it becomes basically a question of either in or out of Europe, right? So the dilemmas become very stark. Why hasn't the same kind of extremism sort of appeared in countries like Spain? The same kind of ideological polarization. I guess in Spain, this type of effect, this kind of strain, was sort of demonstrated on the constitutional relations across different periods of government, right, between the regions and the central government. But you haven't really experienced some kind of an ideological polarization as yet. Do you think that's in the cards? Is that what's happening, or? And I guess I'm trying to sort of tie the different sort of speakers together.
Yes, very brief. I mean, if you see what happened in the last elections, last November, so the elections afterwards in Andalusia and other places, in other places, I mean, people still go to vote for the majority parties. So they're not voting for non-systemic parties or non-systemic movements. But that doesn't mean that people feel they are being represented by those parties. And I think this is precisely the point. That there's no alternative to going to vote for systemic parties, but on the other hand, you do it without believing that it will help anything, right? So, and I think that's what creates the impression that democracy has become simulacrum. How do you say English? Simulacrum. I mean, it's something that it's a ritual that you do, but without believing that it will change anything. Because in the end, you know, the decisions that matter are not being decided within your house. And that creates this sense of alienation, this sense of the impression that, I mean, your destiny is not in your hands anymore. And that's, and this fosters this polarization and a certain, how do I say, ideological shift in favor of anti-systemic parties, right? And that's more or less what I perceive, and also a sense of collective depression. That's based on the idea, literally. It's based on the idea that there's no national project. And there's no national project because your fate doesn't depend on you. And it's not very stimulating.
Okay, can you hear me? This is a question, I guess, for the first speaker, but also for you, I guess, whatever speaker. So I really like your vision of a nice Europe where, you know, we'll become like America and like it's more productive and everything. The problem is for some countries it might be bad. And this now ties in with what you were saying. How do you convince people democratically and everything, you know, to yield sovereignty and do things when it might be bad for some countries? You know, in the past, basically, Germany was buying countries out. They were opening a checkbook, giving money to countries, and just buying the votes. Germany is not doing this anymore, so. And Germany is very pivotal, so Germany has to do it, or we cannot do it democratically. So I wonder how you expect it to happen.
Can I answer that? Yeah. Sorry. I mean, I'm not quite sure who it's going to be bad. I mean, if the European economy was able to produce the same GDP, as the Eurozone had the same GDP as the US, we'd be virtually out of our problem. If it had 10% more than the US, we would be sitting very pretty indeed. So it's not actually the marginal shift is not that great. And if you consider all the barriers that there are in the Eurozone or in the European Union as a whole towards rational economic performance, whether it be linguistic or... And incidentally, one thing which is much underrated is the coming revolution. We're talking about technology, I don't think we'll get through here. The coming revolution in simultaneous translation, in machine translation, is going to be tremendously important in Europe. I mean, there are only two economies in the world, and within 10 years that is going to be really efficient. And the impact of that in Europe and in India, actually, there are big winners, is enormous. I mean, but if you consider the barriers we have, linguistic, technical, the fact that we've got far too many banks, far too many chemical companies, you name it, that only a relatively moderate rationalization delivers a tremendous increase in performance.
Can I elaborate on this? Yeah. So it is good for the economy. Yeah. It's good for the general economy, but it might be bad for Athens.
But for Athens,
yeah, if you lose all Greek banks, it would be good for Europe, but not be bad for a city.
But there will be other things that will come here. The great opportunities for the whole of Southern Europe are in retirement, in healthcare to do with retirement, again to do with if you had the tremendous improvements of potential in the holiday industry and the rest. I mean, this is not the idea that, I mean, it is not true that Florida is a depressed part of the US. If you look at the big story in the US economy over the last 40 years, has been the Sun Belt. So I mean, the notion that who are going to be the winners and losers, but the main point is that if you have a more focused economy in global terms, if Europe was really willing to use its collective power seriously, I mean, the euro has not really achieved its potential as a global reserve currency as yet. And for me, the most powerful argument for Eurobonds eventually is not to do with mutualization, because I think that is much overrated. You can argue about structures for that or the rest of it. That's a huge debate about what you mean by fiscal integration. The crucial technical argument for having a single Eurobond market is that you have something which is as deep as the US Treasury market and as liquid as the US Treasury market. And that will mean, over time, lower interest rates for everyone, even the Germans, actually, if you get that right. And that's how you will make the euro an absolutely dominant global currency. Because I don't think the renminbi is going to rise as fast as some people think, even if it does have de facto monetary union with the yen. And the dollar is in a vulnerable position. And the advantages of having a major global currency, the dominant global currency, don't need to be elaborated. And equally in trade terms, I mean, I was astonished that for a whole range of reasons which are interesting to debate, the ethos of Brussels in trade negotiations has been to bend over backwards to prove itself as a free trading, with a free trading philosophy. That's not, the point of being the biggest global market is that you use your power to your own advantage. And what's the point of it? We're not running some sort of philosophical school of the merits of Adam Smith. We're trying to actually improve the prosperity of our citizens. And Europe could be much, much more muscular in trade terms on the global thing without necessarily throwing out the WTO. And we are so operating beneath the level of our potential strength. That's the point. And that would benefit everyone. And of course, at any time, there will be losers and winners in economic development. But I'm not at all convinced that in a more seriously integrated European economy, that the losers are necessarily in Greece relative to in Northumberland or in Britain. Hasn't been outside where it is. Or in Denmark.